December 18, 1944. A whale, Belgium, the frozen earth crunches beneath American boots as dawn breaks through skeletal trees. Three men in perfect G uniforms sit hunched in the back of an Allied jeep, their breath-forming white clouds in the bitter Ardennes air. Their dog tags are regulation, their weapons authentic, even their cigarettes are American Lucky Strikes. Yet something feels wrong to the military police sergeant approaching their vehicle. In his hands, he carries not a rifle, but a simple question that will seal their fate. These were the dying days of Operation Greif, Hitler's most audacious deception of the war. In the minds of German high command, English-speaking commandos disguised as American soldiers would infiltrate Allied lines, capture bridges, and sow chaos behind enemy positions. The plan seemed flawless on paper, born from the twisted genius of SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny, the man who had rescued Mussolini from an Italian mountaintop prison. But the German commanders had fatally underestimated something uniquely American: the power of a nation's shared culture to expose its enemies. When Skorzeny received his orders from Hitler in October 1944, the Führer assured him that disguising soldiers in enemy uniforms was acceptable under international law, provided they removed those uniforms before engaging in combat. What Hitler failed to anticipate was how thoroughly American culture had woven itself into the fabric of its soldiers' daily conversations. Baseball statistics, radio programs, movie stars, and hometown trivia had become an invisible shield protecting American forces from infiltration. The German infiltrators expected to face American soldiers who, like their Wehrmacht counterparts, discussed only military matters and immediate tactical concerns. Instead, they encountered G's who debated whether the Chicago Cubs belonged in the American League, argued about Mickey Mouse's girlfriend's name, and could recite the batting averages of Yankees players from memory. These commandos had mastered English grammar and pronunciation, but they had never experienced the peculiar rhythm of American popular culture. By December 16, 1944, when the massive German counteroffensive began, Skorzeny's carefully trained commandos discovered that speaking perfect English meant nothing if you couldn't answer whether the Cubs were in the National or American League. American MPs at checkpoints began asking questions that seemed absurdly simple. What's the capital of Illinois? Who plays shortstop for the Yankees? What's Donald Duck's middle name? To native-born Americans, these were childhood memories. To German infiltrators, they were impossible riddles. The transformation in American security procedures was swift and merciless. Within hours of the first reported infiltrations, checkpoints sprouted across the Allied rear areas like antibodies responding to infection. Soldiers who had crossed continents together suddenly viewed each other with suspicion. Even high-ranking officers found themselves detained and questioned. General Omar Bradley himself was stopped and asked to name the capital of Illinois. When he correctly answered Springfield, paranoid MPs still detained him briefly, suspecting the answer was too perfect to textbook. But it was General Bruce Clark who provided the operation's most telling moment. When asked about the Chicago Cubs, the combat veteran confidently declared they were in the American League, a mistake that cost him 5 hours of detention despite his impeccable credentials. This incident revealed both the effectiveness and the limitations of cultural screening. American-born officers could fail these tests just as easily as German infiltrators, yet the system worked because it forced everyone to prove their cultural authenticity through shared knowledge rather than military bearing. Throughout this chaos, one symbol emerged as the embodiment of American abundance and cultural confidence: the C-ration can. While German soldiers survived on increasingly meager portions of black bread and thin soup, captured American rations contained not just food, but luxuries that seemed impossible in wartime: chocolate bars, coffee, cigarettes, and even chewing gum. To German infiltrators accustomed to ersatz coffee and ersatz meat, the casual abundance of American field rations represented a nation that could afford to fight a war without sacrificing its soldiers' comfort. The commandos captured in a whale carried these same American rations, wore the same American uniforms, and spoke with the same regional accents they had practiced for weeks. But when the MP sergeant asked them which team had won the 1943 World Series, their perfectly rehearsed cover stories crumbled. They had memorized American military procedures, learned American slang, and studied American geography. They had not, however, lived through American summers listening to baseball games on kitchen radios or arguing about players' statistics in neighborhood bars. On December 21, 1944, a military commission convened to try the three captured infiltrators, Oberfeinrich Gunther Billing, Obergefreiter Wilhelm Schmidt, and Unteroffizier Manfred Pernis. The proceedings were swift and decisive. The men were found guilty of violation of the laws of war and acting as spies while disguised in American uniforms. 2 days later, on December 23rd, they faced a firing squad behind the American barracks at Henry Chapelle. Their execution served as both justice and warning proof that cultural deception, no matter how sophisticated, could not penetrate the lived experiences of a nation's people. The irony of Operation Greif's failure lay not in its tactical execution, but in its fundamental misunderstanding of American society. Hitler and Skorzeny had studied American military doctrine, analyzed captured equipment, and interrogated prisoners of war. Yet they had never grasped that American strength came not from superior organization or equipment, but from a shared culture so deeply embedded that its citizens carried it unconsciously into battle. Baseball statistics were more than trivia, they were proof of belonging to a community that extended from Brooklyn's sandlots to European battlefields. As news of the infiltrators' capture spread through Allied ranks, American soldiers began to understand that their cultural knowledge had become a weapon of war. The same pop culture that German intellectuals dismissed as shallow entertainment had proven more effective than any military cipher or password system. Mickey Mouse, the Chicago Cubs, and Donald Duck had succeeded where advanced encryption might have failed, creating an unbreakable code written in childhood memories and shared experiences. The failed infiltrators had expected to find American soldiers who, like German troops, focused solely on military objectives and tactical discussions. Instead, they discovered men who carried their entire civilization with them, not just in their weapons and equipment, but in their conversations, their humor, and their unconscious assumptions about the world. These G's didn't just fight for democracy. They embodied it in every casual reference to hometown baseball teams and radio shows. In the end, Operation Greif achieved something its planners never intended. By forcing Americans to articulate what made them distinctly American, the infiltration attempt strengthened rather than weakened Allied morale. Soldiers who had taken their cultural identity for granted suddenly recognized it as a source of strength. They were not just fighting against fascism. They were fighting for a way of life so rich and diverse that its enemies could study it for months without truly understanding it. The C-ration cans that American soldiers shared with liberated Europeans became symbols of this deeper truth. Inside each container was more than sustenance. It was proof of a nation so confident in its abundance that it could afford to feed its soldiers better than many civilians ate in peacetime. German infiltrators might learn to speak like Americans, dress like Americans, and even think like Americans. But they could never truly understand a country that packed chocolate bars in its combat rations and expected its soldiers to know who played third base for the Detroit Tigers. The execution of Billing, Schmidt, and Pernis marked the effective end of Operation Greif, though scattered teams continued operating until the broader German offensive collapsed. Their sacrifice, while tragic, illuminated a profound truth about modern warfare. In an age of mass communication and shared culture, a nation's strongest defense might not be its military technology, but the thousands of small, seemingly insignificant details that bind its people together in common understanding. When the war ended and Otto Skorzeny eventually stood trial, he was acquitted on the grounds that his men had removed their American uniforms before engaging in combat. The legal precedent protected him, but it could not erase the deeper lesson of Operation Greif's failure. No amount of tactical brilliance or operational daring could overcome the fundamental truth that authenticity cannot be manufactured, only lived. The American soldiers at those checkpoints in December 1944 had won not through superior firepower or strategy, but through the accumulated weight of 1,000,000 shared experiences, summer afternoons at ballparks, Saturday mornings at movie theaters, and evening conversations around family radios. The baseball question that sealed the fate of 3 German commandos in a Belgian village became more than an interrogation technique. It became a symbol of how democracy defends itself not through force alone, but through the invisible bonds of common culture that make a free society stronger than the sum of its parts. In asking what team won the World Series, those American MPs were really asking, "Are you one of us?" And in the end, that question proved impossible for any enemy to answer falsely, no matter how perfectly they had learned to wear an American uniform.